Hey guys, Zom Fox here, and today is time to do my Week 7 review of the 2024 United Football League season, where I go over every single game and a quick recap of what happened, who played well, who played bad, as well as looking over the attendance and TV ratings for this week as well. So without further ado, let's just get right on into this with the 4 scores of the past week. Now when you look at it, the first game between the Renegades and Showboats was an absolute blowout. This was the UFL Tank Bowl 2, and might not even be the last Tank Bowl. In fact, it isn't, considering the fact that both the Showboats and Renegades, or Roughnecks, are eliminated from the playoffs. But in this Tank Bowl, the Renegades just obliterated them, 47-23. Then, of course, the game of the week and, well, probably game of the year, the Stallions Battlehawks. This game was an instant classic, lived up to the hype. Final score was 30-26. This game is, at least to me, definitely in the conversation for the best spring football game of all time, along with the 2022 USFL inaugural game, 2022 championship game for the USFL, and the 2023 USFL North Division Championship game. This one's right up there and one of the best games we've ever seen. Then, of course, the Sunday games had the Panthers against DC. This was a very important game. Michigan had a shot to potentially clinch a playoff berth with a win, and DC had a chance to get right into the thick of things with a win, and the Panthers ended up beating them 22-9 with a lot of weird quarterback issues in that game. And speaking of quarterback issues, the Brahmas Roughnecks was a ugly game to watch. Final score was 15-12. The Brahmas barely eked out a win, thanks to a massive quarterback change we'll get to in a bit. Now, the first game, the Renegades versus the Showboats, was just bad. I mean bad in the sense that the Showboats just got absolutely hammered. Look, yes, they had over 300 yards. It wasn't like they got absolutely blown out there. But when you look at the Renegades, they were 6 of 8 on third down. The Showboats were 0 of 3 on fourth down. The Renegades and Showboats actually both played well in the red zone, but the Showboats just couldn't make it there. The Showboats also had 4 turnovers, which turned into 16 Renegades points. So, I mean, yikes. You'd hate seeing that. And so that's pretty much how this game went. The Renegades, whenever they got the ball, they just went and scored. Perez had, the Renegades had 6 TDs. Perez had 3 through the air, as well as Scott having 1 through the air. Davion Smith had 2 on the ground. Luis Perez had one of the best quarterback games his entire season, legitimately. 27 of 32 for 296, 3 TDs, 0 interceptions is an obscene stat line. T-Will did get hurt for the Showboats, but him and Cookus once again were basically the same quarterback, which is just not really all that good. Yes, David Davis and Vinny Papale both lived up to the hype again. But, I mean, they got canceled out because Sal Cannella, Davion Smith, and Javante Payton all did well in the receiving game. It was a blowout, not much to say. Then the game of the year, potentially. The Battlehawks versus the Stallions. At Birmingham, in front of one of the biggest crowds Birmingham has ever seen, debatably. This was a good game. Now, look, I know a lot of people seem to say mistakes. Yes, there were a lot of mistakes made in this game. But that's what happens when two great teams play each other. The fact is the Stallions outplayed the Battlehawks. It just is what happened. You can see that very clearly in just the overall yardage total. The Stallions had almost 150 yards more than the Battlehawks. And the difference is the rushing game and QB play. Adrian Martinez was not slightly, he was clearly the better quarterback on the day. He obliterated McCarron in the head-to-head sense. A much better passing stat line, and his rushing game was the best of any player in the week. And then when you look at the Battlehawks, their best player of the week was Jacob Saylors running the ball, and even he really wasn't all that great. McCarron had one really solid 23-yard rush, but Martinez had a 21-yard rush and then had, another 6 rushes that ended up getting him a bunch of yards, whereas McCarron's other rush got him 1 yard. So, come on. Both guys had the receiver that everybody expected to play good. Hakeem Butler versus Marlon Williams. Hakeem was the better receiver in that sense. But again, the issue is that just overall, the Stallions were a better team. They had a couple of miscues. They had a blocked punt very, very, very late in the game, which allowed for this Battlehawks drive to start so close to field goal range, which granted, field goal wouldn't win them the game, but that's an easy way to view it. So they just got the ball past midfield and then got 4 and out. That was it. Battlehawks lost. The Battlehawks were the worst team, and they almost won it. But in the end, the Stallions proved why they are undefeated and why they are the best team in spring football until they lose. And this game, if this is a championship preview, man, that chip's going to be incredible. Now, the Panthers versus Defenders, the battle of 4 different quarterbacks. Technically 5, but essentially Teamo got hurt, then Francois came in, and like that, he got hurt, and then Jalen McClendon, the emergency QB3, first time we've seen that this season, came in and played serviceably. As a third stringer, you're not really expecting much out of him, and he was solid for being a third stringer. Brian Lewerke was pretty below average, pretty not good. But Bryce Perkins actually played very, very well. 11 of 13 for 116 yards. It'll be a big deal to see if he can do it again next week, pending that Etling ends up missing another game. But overall, again, the Panthers just fully outplayed DC. Jake Bates had another great game. not really much to talk about. The Panthers were the better team. They deserved this win. It was an easy win for them. Final game, yikes. Yeah, I mean, I talked about it in the videos coming out earlier today about the Roughnecks. Dude, the Roughnecks are just hard to watch. This team is so ugly. Essentially, both Garantano and Sinet played. Garantano got injured late. But as for the Brahmas, they just benched Dormade. Dude, Dormade's been awful, and this game was the last straw for the coaching staff. A 42 completion percentage is not going to cut it, even if you are averaging 14 yards per completion, which is a very solid number. Kevin Hogan came in, and even though his yards per completion was a lot worse, he just overall was a much better quarterback, and he's the main reason they won the game. Well, arguably. That's because at the end of the game, when the Brahmas got a field goal, thanks in large part to Kevin Hogan, the Roughnecks were getting the ball from the kickoff like normal, and we were expecting this game to probably go to overtime, except guess what? The ball ends up getting fumbled, and the Brahmas get it, drive a little bit downfield, and kick the game-winning walk-off field goal. Yes, this was a battle of field goals. Now, yes, the Brahmas did score the touchdown beforehand and get the three-point conversion, which is a huge deal. But the point is that the field goals is what made this game really bad for the Roughnecks. The Roughnecks never converted a single TD. They only kicked field goals, and that ended up being why they lost. They technically were a better team for most of the game, just in a sense that they were getting drives that went downfield and actually scored off them. I mean, even then the Brahmas were 1 of 4 in the red zone, but in the end, Roughnecks, they choked. They should have had this game, and they choked. Bad loss. Now attendance. I mean, it was bad. It was a massive disappointment. It was pretty bad. The Birmingham Stallions game having 1456 was a very big disappointment. Now, yes, the first things first is, of course, the tickets distributed versus sales. We know about how many season tickets the DC sold and all that. Look, we all can agree that DC had nowhere near 10,000 people in that stadium, especially when you compare it to how Birmingham looked with their 14,000. Now, I know Mike Mitchell said this is Birmingham's highest game. Even though Mike's a very trustworthy guy, the fact is many officials stated that the 2022 season opener was 17-5. So until we see that beat, that is to me the legit one, especially because when you look back at that game, the stadium was more packed in that one, I believe. Still an incredible number, still the best number they've had definitely since that Week 1 game. But overall, still a disappointment. We were expecting over 15,000. Instead, they barely hit 14. The Renegades, I'm honestly shocked they even had close to that. I mean, again, there was definitely not that many people there, but even having that many sold or distributed is crazy for how bad that team is. In terms of the record, not really how bad they are. Still not horrid, but of course the Roughnecks number just kept going down. It did go down only by like 150. Still went down. Still a bad one. Overall attendance was a very big disappointment. Now the distributed/sold number for the Defenders is worse than any game last year except the Week 4 game that hit 11-5. I know there's weather issues, Mother's Day and all that. All in all, it was a massive disappointment. So the attendance this week was bad. This is probably like the first or second week where you can really say that it was bad, that it overall was a massive disappointment. Yes, the Stallions number is technically a really good number, but again, we were expecting a lot more. This was such a marquee matchup, and for it to not even do 15,000, and this wasn't, and again, it's Mother's Day weekend, but this was not on Mother's Day. This was on Saturday. That was a disappointment, and that's not even the worst part about this game, because the TV ratings for it was also a big disappointment. 758,000 was a huge failure. Now look, the ESPN games were solid. They weren't good, they weren't bad, they were solid. They were above average. Compare it to the XFL last year. Now yes, the XFL in Week 7, that was when they were starting to tweak these games, but understand that all these tweaks they made were to purposely make the ratings improve, which granted you can argue if changing it like last second works or not, but in the end, last year's ESPN games, the highest they had was the 500,000 between the Battlehawks and Roughnecks. Remember, this is the Roughnecks team last year that would go on to lose every single game against the good teams, but finish 7-3. And that game had 500,000. The worst game this week was 572,000 between San Antonio and Houston. And yes, I know St. Louis Birmingham had like a 1.4 million peak, which is a huge peak, but the average viewing on that game was a disappointment. Look, last year's Stallions-Breakers game was very comparable to this. Despite what XFL fans might try and say, that was a very comparable game. There was a very legitimate argument that the New Orleans Breakers of 2023 were the second best team in spring football, when you count for how loaded their roster was. Heading into that game was essentially for the 1 seed, because after this game, neither team would lose. So this game between the Breakers and Stallions was a must-watch game for the USFL, and it hit 700,000. Now this game, which is even bigger than that, in a sense that you have two teams that are mega powers at this point, didn't even hit 800K. Disappointment. Now, the ESPN games, I'm going to be honest, the Arlington-Memphis game having 586,000 is incredible. It was a blowout. It was an awful, awful stadium in terms of the fans that were there. It was awful in terms of the fact it was two teams that have literally nothing to play for at this point. And the fact it hit that high is a really good sign. The Michigan-DC game having 665,000, a really solid number as well. But all in all, this week's TV ratings were disappointing. They weren't bad, they were disappointing. You would like to see at least one 700K game from ESPN. You would have expected this St. Louis-Birmingham game to hit 1 million. Again, I'm not going to buy the excuse against the Mavs Thunder. That's not an excuse to not hit 1 million. I know people are going to say Mother's Day weekend. We'll see for sure just how big an impact it had next week. But especially considering the fact that at this point right now, we all but know the playoffs. It would take San Antonio basically losing out and DC winning out for anything to change there. And even for the 1 seed race, the 1 seed race is basically all there is to watch for. It's pretty much just that. If St. Louis slips up and San Antonio keeps winning, then San Antonio will get the 1 seed, just like how if Birmingham slips up, that Week 10 matchup against the Panthers could end up being a very big deal. But overall, TV ratings were a bit of a disappointment this week. Again, not bad, but disappointing. Which means that overall, in terms of the attendance and TV ratings, this was the worst week overall this season. Again, we expect later in the season for it to get worse. Hopefully, we see a rebound because, again, this week overall was the worst week in regards to TV and attendance. We'll see what happens next week, but that was this week. So that'll do it. This has been Tom Fox. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos, as I upload at least 4 videos a week during the season and 1 weekly short. We're getting closer and closer to 800 subscribers, and we have a giveaway at 1,000. Think about becoming a channel member as well for as little as 99 cents a month. You get a bunch of perks you can see in the descriptions. And as always, have a good night.